Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas. Today, we're going to get into the philosophy behind one of the most controversial Supreme Court decisions of our time, Citizens United.
Right after the 2010 Citizens United decision, you heard a lot of strong reactions just like that one. It sparked a massive debate for sure. But to really understand it, we've got to look past the headlines and ask some pretty fundamental questions about what it even means for a corporation to speak and what that does to democracy.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll cover what the ruling actually did. Then, we're going to dive into a really fascinating philosophical question. What exactly is a person in the eyes of the law? From there, we'll look at how that idea shapes public debate and what it all means for our vision of democracy itself.
All right, first up, what did the Supreme Court actually decide in the Citizens United v. FEC case? So what was the big deal here? Well, for the first time in a century, it meant corporations could dip into their main bank accounts, their general treasuries, to pay for ads directly supporting or attacking a candidate. We're talking about those ads that blanket the airwaves in the critical days right before an election. Now, this whole ruling really hangs on the idea of corporate rights, and that forces us to ask a question that sounds simple but is actually incredibly complex. To get to the bottom of this, we're going to lean on this really cool framework from philosophers Christian List and Philip Pettit. They argue that to make any sense of this, we first have to totally rethink what personhood even means in a legal context. So they have this name for it, performative personhood. The idea is that a corporation isn't a person because it's human, obviously, but because it can act like one within our legal system. Think about it. It can sign a contract, be held responsible, or even be sued. It performs the functions of a legal person. And this is where things get really interesting, because it sets up this huge contrast. We usually think of personhood as being tied to what we are, conscious, living, breathing human beings. But this performative view ties it to what an entity can do. And according to this argument, just because a corporation can do some of the same things as a person, that doesn't make it the same as you or me. And that brings us to the main argument here. If there are different kinds of persons, human persons and corporate persons, then maybe there ought to be different classes of rights. The ability to act like a person in a legal sense doesn't automatically mean you get all the same rights as a citizen in a democracy. Okay, so if we accept that corporations are a different kind of person, then what does that actually mean for their right to speak? And more importantly, how does that affect the rest of our democratic conversation? This is a huge deal, and according to Justice Stevens' famous dissent in the case, the answer you give to this question is everything. The entire justification for corporate free speech really hangs on which side you prioritize. So the majority on the court, they weren't really arguing that a corporation has, feelings or a deep-seated need for self-expression. Nope. Instead, their whole case was built on the listener's interest. They argued that stopping corporations from speaking deprives us, the voters, of information. But Justice Stevens warned that there's a serious, real-world downside to that logic. His point was, look, in the real world where we all have limited time and attention, more speech isn't always better. An absolute avalanche of corporate-funded ads could actually hurt the quality of our democratic debate. It could just bury the voices of actual citizens and make people feel like their own participation is totally pointless. This brings up a bigger question, right? What should public debate even look like? The source materials suggest we're kind of caught between two really powerful competing metaphors for how we even think about free speech. And this slide, man, it just lays it out so clearly. In the marketplace of ideas, we're basically consumers shopping for the best political product. But in the town hall model, we're not consumers. We're active participants. We're the ones shaping the conversation together. One is passive, the other is active. And this choice of metaphor, it isn't just for fun. It plugs directly into two totally different ways of looking at what democracy is even for, a distinction laid out by the political philosopher Joshua Cohen. So on one side, you've got this limited government minimalism view. It's really wary of government power, so it sees any regulation of speech as a dangerous step. From that perspective, Citizens United was necessary to protect free speech. But on the other hand, you have the Civic Equality view. Its main goal is to make sure every citizen has an equal chance to influence the government. And from this viewpoint, unregulated corporate spending is a huge threat to that equality.
And that civic equality model, it draws a really bright line in the sand. It argues that when a citizen speaks about politics, that's an act of self-governance. But a corporation's speech? That's seen as serving its own goals, usually profit. So from this perspective, the corporation isn't really part of we the people, but more of an outside actor trying to influence us.
Okay, let's bring it all together. What's the big takeaway here? Why does looking at this whole debate through a philosophical lens even matter right now? The source material points out that the biggest risk here isn't just about one side winning an election because of money. It's about citizens losing faith in the whole system. The danger is that people start to believe big money calls all the shots, and they just check out.
So in the end, the whole argument is about protecting what Justice Stevens called the breathing room for citizens. It's about making sure there's enough space for everyday people to have a meaningful debate and actually govern themselves without being drowned out.
And that question, that's really what's at the heart of this entire debate that Citizens United kicked off. It's not just a legal squabble. It's a deep philosophical question about what kind of democracy we actually want to live in.